Right. Yeah, I think we're going to get started now, everybody. Welcome to our power meeting. I'm Roxanne Harrell. I'm the campaign director for Straight Ahead, and I am just going to pass it to our executive director, Robert Salim Holbrook.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for this event. A lot of the groups that put this together tonight, as well as many of the faces that I see here tonight, are people that have been a part of this decarceration and abolitionist movement we've been building in Pennsylvania, going back to early 2001, when activists incarcerated within Pennsylvania's prison system and our family members on the outside started the Human Rights Coalition, which in turn gave birth to the Abolitionist Law Center, Amnistad Law Project, as well as the Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration, and inspire countless other groups throughout Pennsylvania, including Decarcerate PA and Let's Get Free. A lot of us at one time were people who were always on the outside of power. We always constituted the communities and families who were pushed away from the seat of power, who were pushed away from the table, or when we were invited to the table or conversations, we were usually used as props, or we were given crumbs from those tables. And those tables include tables formed by politicians, as well as tables built and created by advocates and many nonprofit organizations. Tonight, this event is a culmination of the movement that we've been building for 2 decades in Pennsylvania. The groups that have sponsored this tonight, Straight Ahead, the C4 arm of the Abolitionist Law Center, Free to Ballot, a C4 that emerged from the Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration, and Amnistad Movement Power, the C4 arm of the Amnistad Law Project, are movements that have now built ourselves into a position where not only have we built power, but we now are in a position to wield it. And as people who were previously pushed out of the conversation, as people and communities who were previously used as props, for us to be in a position now where we are not props, not people who are just called out to speak about our experiences and our pain, but we are now movements who are actively participating in the fight to not only free our families, but to build a more progressive and inclusive Pennsylvania. And I find that last statement really relevant, considering that we all sit here on the precipice of the United States Supreme Court on the verge of overturning Roe v. Wade. As someone who knows what it's like to have their bodily autonomy stripped from them, from being in a cage for 27 years, from the age of 16 to 44 and sentenced to die in prison, as someone who at the age of 16 was facing the death sentence at a time when it was constitutional in this country to execute children, I find this really relevant, because our movement, the decarceration and abolitionist movement, knows what it's like to have your autonomy and agency stripped from you. And we stand in solidarity with all the movements who are going to be pushing back and fighting back against the United States Supreme Court and the extreme right trying to take this country in a different direction. So I just wanted to center that in this space right now. And so the purpose of this event that we're having tonight is for our movement to wield the power that we have built and to show you, our constituents and our people. When I sit here and look around at some of the faces, I see Miss Dee Dee, I see Mama Pat, I see many people who were in the trenches dozens of years ago with me when there were no movements that are here at this table right now, right? And I see many family members here who were struggling alone, you're not alone. You're not fighting alone anymore. You know, we built this table, we built this movement, not only to fight for you, but to fight with you, to not only free your loved ones, but to free the state. So I thank you for coming out. Tonight, you're going to hear from many speakers. You're going to hear from many movements at this table. And more importantly, we're going to hear from each other later on when we go into breakout rooms. So I appreciate you coming out tonight. I appreciate you supporting us. And I look forward to not just fighting for you, but fighting with you. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Roxanne, who is going to introduce our first speaker for tonight.
Yeah, actually, if we can play the montage of the things that we've done before we get into the updates. This is a montage of like some events that we've done, so you got everybody in this meeting can get an idea of some of the things that we've been doing around the state.
These caskets, they represent a whole lot. I was released about 8.5, almost 9 months ago after serving 21 years. I watched the first prisoner of the Department of Correction die at SCI Phoenix from COVID.
People are sentenced to a life without parole sentence. They are sentenced to die in prison, and they are in fact dying in prison.
Prison is nothing but the continuation of the U.S. slavery system.
We are not making people safe, and we're denying people the ability to reconnect with families and help rebuild communities.
And like every other person on this earth, they are entitled to dignity. They are entitled to get respect.
Prisons are something that has not been with us forever, and prisons are something that are not making our community safer.
It's been too long living, and I'm afraid to die. I don't know what's up there beyond the clouds. It's been a long time coming. I know, change has gotta come. Oh, yes, it is. There's a time I will go to my brother. I've asked my brother, will you help me please? He turned me down, and then I asked my dear mother. I said, mother, I'm down on my knees. It's been a time, Lord, very long. Somehow I thought I was still able to try to carry on. It's been a long time coming, and I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes, it is. Like I said, I went to my little bitty brother. Oh, my brother. I asked my brother, help me, please. He turned me down, and then I go.
Yeah, thank you, Maddie. So like I am going to pass it back to Salim just to talk briefly about some of the victories we've had in the last year. And then we'll get into our campaign updates from our different groups.
Yes, thank you, Roxanne. Some of the victories that we had in the past year was, we partially ended prison gerrymandering through a collective effort of many different advocacy groups in Pennsylvania. And while we were not successful in totally ending prison gerrymandering, and we are not satisfied with the carve out that happened with prison gerrymandering. For people who don't know, prison gerrymander is a process where prisoners incarcerated from urban areas like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and Harrisburg and Allentown are incarcerated in rural communities and then counted as constituents in those communities. And that thereby enhances the political power of those communities in those rural conservative areas. We're not satisfied with the carve out that allowed lifers and people serving more than 10 years to be continued to be counted in those districts. However, we were successful in pushing this issue to the point that it became something that was a contentious fight in the state legislature. And we learned two things from that victory. One is that although we have reached a stage of power in this Commonwealth where we can influence legislators, we still are not at the point where we can move them to the positions we need them to get to, right? So we didn't accept that partial victory. That was a compromise that was imposed on us. Something that, again, I'm going to repeat, we're not satisfied with, but we were able to successfully partially end the practice that is resulting in now close to 30,000 prisoners being counted back in the communities that they emerged from. The number may be a little lower. I may be a little freestyling a little bit with that number, a little high. It may be more in the 20,000 prisoners. Something that we also were successful at was a successful referendum in Allegheny County that banned solitary confinement in Allegheny County and also no-knock police warrants. Many of us who witnessed the uprisings in 2020 are familiar with the name George Floyd. However, Breonna Taylor is an African-American woman that was killed in Louisville, Kentucky, as a result of a no-knock police warrant. We were successful in ending that practice in Allegheny County. And that practice was, again, that referendum was a community collaboration between movements, Abolitionist Law Center, the Human Rights Coalition, and Alliance for Police Accountability, One Hood, Unite Here, and so many other movements in Pittsburgh that for years we built relationships in order to win that referendum. Now, there is always in America, victories, one, have to be held. That's something I like to remind people over and over again. We have to make sure that we enforce the ban on solitary confinement and no-knock warrants. Several other victories that we had is we brought many of our loved ones home through the commutation process the past year, actually the past 2 years. Their names are too numerous to name, but I will name Avis Lee, the Horton brothers. We recently have some of our movement leaders, Terrell Carter and Phil Rosado coming home. It's been dozens of lifers being released, and a lot of that has been the pressure that has been put on the Board of Commutations. And again, that is something that we are going to push harder. We're not satisfied in just increment. We understand incremental victories, but we're not satisfied with incremental victories. We are committed to pushing to bring our people home. We have also been very successful in introducing legislation for geriatric parole, introducing legislation for geriatric parole, and introducing legislation to end life without parole sentences, something that we are committed to as a movement to end, as well as solitary confinement in the state legislature. So those are just some of the victories that we have had the past year, and we are committed to pushing further. And you're going to hear about some of the victories that we're looking forward to this year, because that is just as important as our past victories, and our past victories build us to the point where we are now this year contending for power on multiple fronts, to not just free our loved ones, but again, to create a better and more prosperous, progressive Pennsylvania for all of us. So I'm going to turn this over to my comrades from the Amnistad Movement Power.
Wait, so I think we're actually doing breakout rooms now.
Oh, sorry. All right. I will turn this back over to Roxanne, who will take it from here.
Yeah, so we are going to get to the campaign updates in a very short time, but we wanted to get to know everybody a bit better. So we are going to be breaking out into some breakout rooms and for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then we're going to come back to the general meeting so that we can hear the updates from Straight Ahead, Amistad Movement Power, and some from, and from Free the Ballot as well. So Maddie, I guess you can start the breakout rooms.
I'm still making them. Stall with something interesting.
Can you give the questions for everyone?
Oh, absolutely. So we're just, like I said, we're wanting to get to know each other, but also we want to know, why you were interested in coming to this meeting. So that's the first question. And the other one is what your connection to this movement is. So we're introducing ourselves, why you were interested in coming to this meeting, and what your connection to this movement is. And hopefully we can all have a conversation with each other. Thank you for putting that in the chat, Nikki. David, did somebody have a question?
No, I was just gonna say you could put it in the chat so everybody could know, but Nikki was on top of it.
Awesome.
Maybe while we're doing that, so one of the things that I do a lot of in my organizing is I get to travel around the state to see different folks. So maybe if folks can just drop, it's really nice to see folks really spread throughout the whole state here. If people could maybe just drop in the chat where you're from so that other people get to see that, because a lot of times I know we're working on one campaign that's really local and we know our crew or we know the folks that we work with. But one thing that's nice about this is that we do have multiple groups working on multiple campaigns. So I think it would be really nice if we could just see that diversity here in the chat. I'm loving this: Center County, Philly, Lehigh Valley, more Center County, couple Philly, Delco, Chester County, Pittsburgh, Lancaster, Coatesville.
That's awesome. I think the rooms might be ready now.
Yeah, I think rooms are ready. Also, Maddie, if you can stop the recording so it doesn't have the...
In PA prisons.
This meeting is being recorded.
There's about there's about 5,300 lifers in PA prisons, and 2,600 of those are considered geriatric. And just so like people understand, like 20 years ago, that number was 800. So like over the last 20 years, our geriatric lifer population has more than tripled. And that's not because, older people are committing crimes and, going to prison. It's because young people are getting old in prison. And so, it's time for meaningful change in Pennsylvania. Like there's no way, there's lots of people who are deserving of a chance for freedom. And like the only way that, we're ever going to have like a meaningful amount of people get out. We do have the commutations process, which Lee mentioned earlier, but it doesn't release as many people as there needs to be. Like I said, there's thousands of lifers currently inside PA prisons who have no recourse and who have no chance to get out. So really, what we're left with is passing some kind of meaningful legislation, and that's what we're fighting for. So I'm going to be honest with you, this is not an easy undertaking. Pennsylvania, like the landscape is not, ripe for passing, geriatric parole or like, to end life without parole. Many of we are in a Republican-led Senate and House, and it's not exactly a popular issue. It's not easy. And so, it's been challenging to make ground in a lot of ways, but that also doesn't mean it's impossible. So I'm going to be giving you some updates on some of the things we have been able to make progress on, but also that's going to be coupled with some of the challenges we're currently facing and that we're going to be facing going into the future, and the things that we need to do in order to build power so that we can ultimately get this legislation passed, right? So to start off, like some of the things that we have been able to do is, we've had, in the last year, we've met with, almost 100 different legislative offices. And so like, this includes, Republicans and Democrats, this includes all of the offices of members who sit on the judiciary in the Senate, and almost all the members of the judiciary in the House. For those of you who don't know, any legislation that we pass for criminal justice reform goes through the Judiciary Committee. So the members who sit on those committees, are very important to connect with, because they're going to be the first point of contact for any legislation that we introduce or we want to pass. And so, in these meetings, I think it's been really useful because, one, we've been able to kind of get a better idea of the landscape in Harrisburg, and to better identify who our allies are and who can be moved and who cannot be moved. And so that has been very useful. Another thing that Salim actually mentioned earlier is that we have 3 bills that have been introduced, right? So we have 2 bills in the Senate. Those are SB 135 and 835. Those has been introduced with Senator Street. 135 is, what we call the lifers bill. It eliminates the mandatory life without parole sentencing for first and second degree murder. And then 835 is a geriatric parole bill, medical and geriatric parole bill that creates parole eligibility. And then in the House, we have a companion bill to SB 835 introduced by Rep. Kinsey, which is HB 2347. So these are some things that have happened that are significant. We also have 2 Republicans that we're working with to introduce bills in the House for medical and geriatric parole. So those are things that are happening. In addition, we have like a bi-weekly coalition that we work with that are partners in this work across the political spectrum. So that includes us, Amistad Law Program, and also American conservative groups like Commonwealth Foundation and Americans for Prosperity. So we have a very close working relationship with those groups, which has helped with coordination and to strategize around this work, right? So those are all really good things. So now I guess for the challenges is that, there's still so much work that has to be done. And this issue, like I said, is still not something that's popular. A lot of people and a lot of legislators, simply do not know a whole lot about it. And some of them that do are, they're hostile to it. And, so it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of, exposure to convince some of these people. But there are people that are movable. I don't want to be completely discouraging. I think there is room for movement, but we also have to be intentional about what we're doing and how we're going about doing it, right? So I want to talk about 3 different areas where we think is important for people to get involved in order to advocate for these bills and build more power in the Capitol in Harrisburg. So the first one is that we're wanting to do more grassroots lobbying. We want you to contact your legislators and set up meetings with them and tell them that these issues matter to you, especially if you're living in a rural area and you have representation by Republicans. We want you, to set up meetings with them, tell them that this matters to you and that, why this is so important to pass legislation like this, because it doesn't only affect people in Philadelphia. This is something that is statewide, right? And so we want you to lobby and we want to support you in that journey. Our staffer, David Garlock, is going to be, he just dropped his information in the chat, but also Zelba, can you drop the link for our grassroots lobbying so people can sign up? Yes. Zelba, yes. Zelba just dropped a link in the chat for grassroots lobbying for people who want to sign up. David will be reaching out to these people to help them set up visits. But like I said, we need as many people as possible to be reaching out to people in the Capitol so that they know that this issue is important. The second thing that I want to talk to you about is pen pal writing to people on the inside. So we strongly believe that having a connection with those on the inside makes this, makes for stronger advocates, and also makes, is more impactful, right? So we are going to be having a workshop for people who are interested in having a pen pal for someone who's currently in prison. And Zelba, can you also drop the link for that in the chat? So people who are interested in having a pen pal, we're going to be teaching you what that process is, and we're going to be assigning somebody on the inside for you to communicate with. And that will be sometime at the beginning of June, I believe June 2nd. And there's going to be a link that Zelba will drop in the chat shortly for people who are interested in that. And the final thing, which is actually the most important thing, right, is the Survivor Justice Network. So I want to say that, I believe that this is probably one of the most important pieces of our work that hasn't been fully developed. And for those of you who are survivors and victims of crime, and who also believe in decarceration, we want you to be part of this work, right? Because what we have found when we meet with a lot of these politicians, one of the first things that they say is, well, what about the victims? They can agree with things and understand things on a intellectual level, but then it'll always come back to the victims. In the past, victims' narratives have been weaponized against passing legislation to change these laws. And only a certain narrative has been used, a narrative of wanting maximum punishment, a punitive narrative. But as we know, all victims and survivors aren't, they're not all the same, and they're not a monolith. There's a lot of diversity, and that diversity currently is not being represented and not being uplifted, especially not in Harrisburg, right? So, we want survivors and victims to go to Harrisburg themselves and tell these legislators what they want. We want it, to come from their mouths, not ours, because, ultimately it's their experiences and they have the right to those experiences. But we want to be able to build a network of survivors and victims, one, to talk to legislators, but also, so we have a network, people are able to talk to each other and, build power to advocate for issues together. So Zelba, if you can drop the link for the Survivor Network as well, for people who are interested in getting involved in that work. Like I said, I believe this is probably one of the most important aspects of our job, and that needs to be built out, because some of these hardliners, they're actually moved by, survivor stories. We had an experience, just about a month ago, we had a few, several victims and survivors go to Harrisburg to talk to a few Republicans, and, it was impactful to them. They were able to, some of them didn't know what to say. These were people we had met with previously who were couldn't be moved. But when faced with, a survivor who's advocating for decarceration, they didn't know what to say. So, I mean, this is what I'm saying. This is something that's really powerful, and this is work that needs to be done. Some of you might also know about the Office of the Victim Advocate has been a barrier for reform in the past as well. And so part of the Survivor Network would be to engage and connect with the victim advocate as well. So like I said, I hope, those of you who want to get involved, please sign up. And right now, I'm going to pass it to Chris from Amistad Movement Power to give updates about the campaigns that they're working on.
Thank you, Roxanne. Okay, yes, there are things going on with sharing things. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. And again, thanks, Roxanne, for sharing those important updates in the movement for second chances. We've been at this fight together for years, and we'll be in this fight until the people we care about who are incarcerated in Pennsylvania prisons and who have worked hard to turn around their lives can come home. One thing I want to point out is that while we have been in this fight in various capacities, I'm excited to be speaking tonight for Amistad Movement Power, which is an organization that just launched last week and is a sister organization to Amistad Law Project. Can everybody give us a little love, maybe in the chat, or feel free to come off mute if that's a thing you're into.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Chris.
Yes, I definitely appreciate the amped puns. All of those are
Congrats.
welcome. Amistad Movement Power wants to get movement candidates in office who will stand against mass incarceration and we want to make sure the issues that impact our communities are prioritized. Amistad Movement Power is going to amplify fights in society to reduce the power of police and prisons, and fights in the community and at the ballot box to grow the collective power of everyday people like us. We're really excited for this new step on our journey and really excited to be fighting shoulder to shoulder with our movement family and Straight Ahead and Free the Ballot. So one of the things that I really appreciated about Roxanne's update is the evaluation of obstacles that are in our way as we fight for second chances. We need to be really clear-eyed about who is standing in our way if we hope to move them and clear the road for second chances. From what we've seen in our collective work over the years, one of the primary groups to stand in the way of second chances is district attorneys, and in particular, the Pennsylvania District Attorney Association, or PDAA. So the PDAA is the organization that brings together the political power of 66 elected district attorneys, every Pennsylvania DA except Philly DA Larry Krasner. And it focuses that political power to lobby for more tough on crime legislation that puts people in prison and puts them away on longer sentences. So year after year, they stand in opposition to parole for lifers, they lobby for new legislation that expands mandatory minimum sentencing, and they work to sabotage and water down efforts at reform. Most recently, they wrote a part of a really problematic probation reform that we all oppose, SB 913. And the power of district attorneys extends beyond just their ability to meddle and oppose criminal justice reform. These are individuals who are actively trying to get long sentences for people in our communities or to stop them from coming home. What's more is that we see these individuals meddle in our political process. Recently, we saw Lehigh County District Attorney Jim Martin unveil a plan to send detectives to monitor voting ballot drop boxes. This Republican DA is clearly trying to create an atmosphere of voter intimidation and create another barrier for our communities to participate in the electoral process. So that's why we are engaged in a campaign to hold district attorneys in Pennsylvania and the PDAA accountable. We and our movement partners are demanding that they support geriatric parole for people 55 and older. And this year, we are going to begin shining a light on district attorneys who stand in the way of second chances and who work to disempower our communities and let cops who abuse their power off the hook. So right now, we're working with community members in Lehigh and Montgomery counties to get faith leaders to sign on to letters to get the DAs there to support geriatric parole. We're pressing district attorneys in Allegheny, Chester, and Delaware counties to support geriatric parole as well. And we're going to be moving out in other counties as well across Pennsylvania. So we're going to be putting a sign-up form in the chat, or maybe it's already there, if people want to get involved in holding district attorneys accountable in those counties. Another thing we're doing, we're trying to work on is to create alternatives to policing. For too long, cops have had virtually unchecked power to abuse our communities with impunity. So we're working to take that power away. And that means taking away responsibilities from them to give them to unarmed people trained in de-escalation. Currently, our movement partners and we are fighting to expand and support unarmed mental health crisis response in Philadelphia. Last year, our movements were part of winning millions of dollars of funding for a pilot program in Philly that would dispatch mobile crisis teams of mental health professionals to people in crisis in our communities. This year, we're fighting to expand that program and to fight against a parallel program called co-responders. Co-responders would pair a mental health professional with an armed cop and send them to people in crisis. People in our communities need a care response, not a cop response. Around this year's Philly budget, we're supporting and amplifying the demands of the Treatment Not Trauma Coalition and trying to get Philly City Council to double the amount of funding to mobile crisis response. We're having a press conference at Philadelphia City Hall on Thursday, May 19th at 10 a.m. If you can make it down to join the press conference, come join us in demanding that City Council fund the trauma-informed mental health services our communities deserve. If you can't make it down, you can also get involved in that fight by writing to your City Council person or tweeting at them if you're in Philly and asking that they support doubling the funding for mobile crisis response. And it's also important to flag that next year, there are going to be elections for City Council and mayor. And we really need to make sure that candidates for these offices support creating alternatives to the police and empowering our communities. The last thing I want to speak with you about is a serious win for our movements. For years, we've been working to expand commutation at the Board of Pardons. And like when I say we, I mean not just Amistad Law Project, Amistad Movement Power, but really our entire movement. Because for years, it really has been the only way that people who are serving life without parole and other long-term sentences can come home. Last week, the majority of lifers up for commutation got the recommendation of the board to come home. What's more is the session before this, the majority of lifers got the recommendation to come home. So while we're still fighting for comrades like David Daoud Lee, whose vote was delayed last week, it's a high cause for celebration that incarcerated movement leaders like Felix Rosado and Terrell Carter are coming home to fight this fight outside of prison walls. And we couldn't be more filled with joy from this news. What's more is that because 2 politicians sit on the board, people told us that the Board of Pardons would be completely shut down this year because it's an election year. They said that the politicians on the board wouldn't want to vote for anyone convicted of a serious crime to come home because it would be a political liability. But our movements have actually changed that political calculus, at least for people running as Democrats. They know that we expect them to show compassion and mercy and stand against mass incarceration. And with some exceptions, that's what we saw them do at the board last week. We saw them vote to give 8 lifers a second chance. If there's one lesson we can take from this, it's speak up. We need to let elected officials know that we expect them to stand for second chances. And we need to vote for candidates that support second chances in the primaries and in the general elections. A little bit later, we're going to be hearing from the amazing T-Ba from Free the Ballot. We're going to hear some more from Celine from Straight Ahead and Sean from Amistad Movement Power about what's at stake with the spring primary and how we can stand for second chances at the ballot box. So with that said, I'm going to kick it to Straight Ahead for updates on the campaign to limit and end solitary confinement in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's John Rowland.
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, congratulations to the new AMP, which we'll all be rocking with all the time, I'm sure, coming up soon. So I'm gonna tie together a few things that people had said before to explain what we're working on as far as solitary goes. As Roxanne mentioned previously, I know a lot of folks on this meeting know this, but for those that don't, we have a really tough legislature, not only because it's Republican controlled in both the House and Senate, but also because it's Pennsylvania. So it's not just Republicans, but it's Republicans of like every kind that are spread out all over the place. And it's really tough to get them to get into any agreement around which things to move forward. And for folks that have been working on that, we know how just kind of frustrating that can be, knowing how much help, how much relief people need right away. And, you know, all this, a lot of the focus that we've had around commutation, especially shout out to Amistad on that work and Let's Get Free before that, was in part because it did manage to get around the legislative roadblock. You know, commutation is one of the few ways that you can get around that sentence. So we've been looking in similar ways for how we can continue to get people, to keep people safe within prisons while they're stuck there, to have some of the most harmful and trauma exacerbating practices cut down while they're inside of the prisons. And we know that that's really limited at the state level as well for the same reasons. We're basically limited to asking the prisons themselves, the Department of Corrections, to make changes that we think would take care of people better, offer them rehabilitative services, offer them trauma therapy, et cetera. And we all know that that doesn't go particularly far. The DOC always says their job is to warehouse people and make sure that there's no, that the environments aren't violent or anything. Or so we can either ask the DOC or we can get something to happen legislatively. And with legislature being what it is, that usually doesn't go anywhere either. So we organized for a while for a great limitation on solitary confinement that would put the state prison system as well as the county jails throughout the state in line with the international United Nations standard protocols on incarceration. One of the rules of which held that any more than 14 days at a time of solitary confinement, if any kind of isolated confinement lasting more than 20 hours per day, should constitute torture and should never be used under any circumstance, and that solitary in general shouldn't be used as a punishment. So we put together a bill and started pushing that as Abolitionist Law Center, Human Rights Coalition, and Straight Ahead a few years ago, and pushed it and ran into the same sort of limitations that Roxanne referred to before. So while still wanting to and keeping our eyes focused on the state prison system as a whole so that we can change that, change all the counties with it, we started looking around for some ways that we could make more immediate changes, not only to make sure that there was less solitary happening and that there was more programming available to folks around the state, but also to give ourselves some momentum to not have to keep bashing our head against the wall. And one of the ways that we were able to do that locally was in Allegheny County. Abolitionist Law Center had been working for a number of years on investigating the local county jail, Allegheny County Jail, and exposing the conditions there, exposing the various practices that were there. And as a result of a lot of that agitation, some local partners who do electoral work were interested in putting a few referendums on the ballot, a few ballot initiatives to basically circumvent the local governments and the state government and to create a law directly that voters could just vote on. They could say, we want this thing to happen. So that passed successfully. And there's been an ongoing fight within Allegheny County by a bunch of brave lawyers, activists, organizers, to try to make sure that that gets implemented as the voters intended it to. The policy is very, very clear, very clearly prohibits anybody to be inside prison for more than 20 hours without 4 hours out of cell time in congregate settings. But this just shows you, I think, how much defiant opposition we're facing, not just sort of like opposition, but people absolutely refusing to do the thing that they're supposed to be doing. Allegheny County has found all sorts of ways to deny that to happen. But folks have fought that good fight and managed to bring a lot of attention to the ways that the county jail is messing with folks' rights and with their now enshrined legal rights to be kept out of cell. So it's been really nice to see kind of a community come together around that to make sure that the referendum is formed. And it was great to see, shout out to Alliance for Police Accountability, who was the main people going out and getting the votes to get that thing on the ballot. Ton of hard work that went into that. But the kind of effort to get the signatures, to get things on the ballot, to then talk about them, and then to keep pressure on the county to actually enforce that referendum was all a process of organizing, right? It allowed people to link up together, allowed for different groups to work together. It allowed for just a bunch of different things to happen that otherwise wouldn't have happened, in addition to it providing relief to folks who are inside of that county jail, and kind of changing narratives, changing the ways that people were thinking about what we were doing within our county jails. So the thing that I want to talk about today is what we're doing right now to carry forward that work. And without going into too many details, there's only certain places, certain counties where you can do ballot initiatives that allow things to directly go onto the ballot and have voters decide on it. But earlier on this year, we were looking around at some places where that would be possible, and trying to find some local partners who were interested in replicating the same thing we did in Allegheny County elsewhere. So the two places where we found local partners, Pennsylvania Stands Up, we love you, Lehigh Valley Stands Up, Lackawanna, NEPA stands up. So appreciative that folks there agreed to pick this up and have their volunteers go to work on that. But yeah, that's Lehigh County. Allentown is the major city there. They are taking on this solitary ban for the signature gathering starts in the summertime here. We'll be starting that in mid-June, going up through August for that. And also Lackawanna County, of which the main city is Scranton, will be trying to do the same. Wish us luck. Scranton's tough territory. But definitely wanted to both just kind of shout this out as a way that, you know, just all of us, all of these different groups, all these individuals who are in this room, ways that we can come up with to think of different ways to move our movement forward, to continue to make sure that we are making changes, that we are out there changing minds and organizing with people to get things done. That idea really did come from a bunch of groups getting together and talking about that. So I wanted to put it out there as a way of getting creative with our organizing, but also because it's one of the major things that Abolition Law Center is going to be working on throughout this summer and into next year. And one of the really good things about this type of a campaign is that anybody who is interested in being involved with it can do something really simple, direct, and that will have immediate results to try to give folks the relief and the care that they need while they're inside of these county jails. So if anybody is within, you know, a short driving distance of Lehigh County or Lackawanna County up in the northeast part of the state, we have lots of stuff to do, lots of ways to plug folks in. So I think those are a form to get involved with. That is in the chat there. There will be also some virtual things, and we'll stay in touch with that. But also there's ways to do this in other parts of the state as well, and hopefully we can all link up around that. I know some folks who are from counties at this meeting. We can actually do it in your county, and every general election, every primary election, we have the opportunity to do that type of thing. Also, to bring up another thing that Amistad Movement Power just mentioned is the crisis response things. While we're doing the solitary confinement things at the county level, in those two big cities, Allentown and Scranton, we're also doing a referendum to force those cities to create mobile crisis units that would immediately respond to all 911 calls for mental health checks, drug overdoses, and a handful of other categories. And again, this would kind of circumvent some of the legislative pushback, the very slow kind of dilution of momentum that happens in all these city council, county council, et cetera, gatherings that folks like Amistad have been struggling with. With this tool that we have, the ballot initiative, we'd just be able to say, hey, the voters want to create this thing, you have to create it. So that's also in those same areas, Allentown and Scranton. And again, that's if folks want to sign up for that. We have lots of stuff to do, and a bunch of local partners who you can build with along the way. So that's it for the referendum updates, but it's exciting stuff and it's happening coming up real soon. And I just want to kick it over to my co-organizer on the solitary campaign to talk about another way that we've sort of turned our energy and our kind of creative thinking towards trying to solve some county jail issues and to keep momentum going, even as it's difficult to get change at the state or local level. So JT.
Yes. How's everybody doing? I just want to thank everybody for coming out. It's always a pleasure for me to be here, to share information and to get new information from people. As John was saying, some of the things that we do, far as solitary confinement, we were trying to have it banned in the state completely. But as it's been said over and over again, the Republicans run Harrisburg, so they're not going to hear that legislation. So one of the things we decided to do in Philadelphia was we decided to look at the county prisons on a more local level. We looked at the county prisons, saw how bad the solitary confinement was is just as bad as it is in any state prison in this state. So we thought about ways, how could we possibly have this ban? How can we get a ban on solitary confinement? So one of the ways that we came up with, we thought about it and we talked to a few people and they said, well, how about a resolution, having city council pass a resolution? Well, we worked on a resolution, we looked into it, we thought it was a good idea, which it is a good idea. However, after further discussions with members of city council, we found out that a resolution does not have any enforcement power. City council can pass a resolution, but that does not mean that it's going to be enforced. It's just like an agreement that they agree that solitary confinement should be banned, but that doesn't solve the problem. So we did further research, talked to more people, found out that one of the ways that we could ensure that anything dealing with oversight of the PDP, Philadelphia Department of Prisons, was an ordinance, a city ordinance, which would effectively amend the charter in Philadelphia to dictate that solitary confinement is banned. But then we ran into an additional problem. The problem with that is that getting it through city council and getting it passed, that was a longer stretch. So what we said was, there's no oversight going on in the county prisons. Right now, if you asked about any oversight for the county prisons, they have none. They have something they call an advisory board. The advisory board, to make a long story short, it does nothing. They recommend nothing. They're just their name, right? They have no power to do anything, so therefore they make no recommendations. They meet their little 4 or 5 times a year, and that's it. So without any oversight, the prisons just continue to deteriorate and deteriorate. So what we said was, why don't we push for an oversight board to make the complete prison safe, right? To make the whole prison, at least have the prison be safe, the safety of the prison, because we getting reports that people were being murdered, people were dying, and just so many egregious things were happening there that we knew we had to do something. So what we decided to do was with the ordinance. Now, within that ordinance, we said, well, let's put in within that ordinance a portion for an oversight board. The oversight board would effectively be men and women who would oversee the county prisons and have authority to do things, to make recommendations and do things like that. So we're currently working on that right now. We are as we work on that right now, we're also working on, they're having a budget hearing surrounding the county prisons. The county commissioner is supposed to be coming to testify in front of city council for a budget hearing. So what we decided to do was try to get some questions in to the commissioner about the conditions of the county prisoners, about some of the things that we've been hearing, some of the things that's been reported by not just prisoners, but guards. So we plan to have city council ask particular questions pertaining to why is there no oversight? You know, who's looking at the prisons and so forth and so on. And as a means to getting more attention, we're also planning to have a rally on that day. We're planning to have a rally to speak out about the conditions, to speak out about what's going on there. It's on May the 11th from 12:30 to 1:30 at the same time that they will be having the budget hearings in City Hall. Now, the budget hearings will be remote, so we could not actually attend them. So this is our way of getting the word out, disrupting, agitating, whatever you want to call it. If anyone on this call would like to participate, I'm going to drop my email inside the chat. Please get in contact with me because we would love to have as many people out there as possible, because the Philadelphia County prisons are just a terrible, dangerous place to be. And mind you, that these people have not been convicted of any crime. So with that, I'll send it back to John.
And I'll actually pass it right on over to T-Bomb Wispy with Free the Ballot.
Hi, so I'll start off, Wispy. You can end it if you like. I want to just say this meeting is really grounding. It's what was lacking for sure, because I felt a little disjointed. But this is so far been very grounded, and I'm very excited about it. To get right to the point, Free the Ballot was founded by two geniuses that understood the importance and power of direct contact with voters. And I'm not going to say their names because they'll feel very uncomfortable, but we're basically a multiracial incarcerated voter family network machine. And that means that we're going to be at the doors of voters with our lit and our narrative to explain exactly what's been happening in Philadelphia and what they can do about it. Unlike the Democratic establishment that just maintains the order of incumbents and just does whatever they want based upon how much money you pay into the ward. Free the Ballot is going to ensure that that there is an election, the date of the election, your ability to vote by mail, the fact that if you have a felony conviction, you can still vote, and who the candidates are. So to get right to it, we have a dedicated steering committee, a really tiny staff. Karima McCleary does more work than I would think anybody else, with the exception of the awesome JT and the canvassers that we have. And in March of 2022, Free the Ballot launched something called In These Streets. We did it in response to group violence intervention, focused deterrent, and place-based investigations, which was the police's way of getting the community to tell on itself and to accept some of the harmful things that was allowed to happen. Place-based investigations, if you were to look into that, is why Breonna Taylor was actually murdered. It was more about that area that than trying to get a hold of the person that they did a no-knock warrant on. So when we launched In These Streets, we surveyed within less than 6 weeks, 500 Philadelphians around issues that range from racial biases to profiling, adversity, DHS, and over policing. And their responses, these were average everyday people. These were not advocates or activists or folks that belonged to a particular group that we were already affiliated with. And time after time, we ran into people who were directly impacted by incarceration, whether it was a family member, friend, they themselves, or someone that they really cared about and wasn't related. And they wanted to know more about the work that was being done. We talked specifically about why it was important to run candidates against incumbents that continue to step out of their lane as legislators and into the lane of the judicial system. Such candidates like Amin Brown, who drafted legislation around mandatory minimums. And so now he has an opponent that we are supporting and throwing down for. But I also wanted to mention that Free the Ballot has done, sorry, I'm looking for my notes here, over 23,000, we've knocked over 23,000 doors. And we've done it in a little over 1 month. It was exactly 1 month and 1 week, starting March the 25th. And we just stopped with that number so far at May the 2nd. And now I'm going to give you the endorsed candidates that we support. For PA Senate is Paul Prescott, who's in Southwest Philly. PA House, it would be Rick Krajewski, who's also in West Philly. Elizabeth Fiedler, who's in South Philly. Carol Kazim in Chester. Cass Green in West Philly. Andre Carroll in Northwest. Ronnie Green in West Philly. Chris Rabb in Northwest. Izzy Smith Wade L in Lancaster. Tarek Khan in Roxborough. And for US Congress is Summer Lee in Western Pennsylvania. And then Lieutenant Governor, we're supporting Austin Davis and Josh Shapiro for governor. So outside of that, we need your help. We're very excited to talk about the things that cause adversity, that lead to oppression, and continue the mass incarceration cycle that so many people actually just benefit financially off of. My name is Tanya Ba. You can find my information, or I would say get in touch with Karima, who is on probably almost every group that you can think of. If you want to volunteer to canvass with us, we would love to have you. Thanks. Wispy, I guess you're next.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, T. And thanks to everybody for coming out tonight. This is a really great event. I was tapped to talk a little bit about the governor's race and the lieutenant governor's race. And I want to, just like open that up with saying like, really, this primary, before I get into that, like, I think T highlighted some of the great candidates that Free the Ballot is endorsing. And there's some really exciting movement candidates, people that are 100% aligned, like Paul Prescott, Rick Krajewski, Izzy, and so on. But there are also defensive races that we have to contend with, where we're not in full alignment with the candidates that we might support, but where the consequences are huge and where we really have to contend with what's going on and with what the kind of realities and the power that's kind of bearing down on us. So basically, I don't want to get too long into this speaking about the governor's and lieutenant governor's race, but I think what I want to stress here is that sometimes the best offense is a good defense. And when it comes to statewide politics in the election in November, we're going to get to choose both who we want in office and who we want as our opponent. The question that will face us is, who would we rather face off against in the fight to bring people home from PA prisons? Because we're not going to fully agree with anybody that gets into that governor's seat. But we may find out that one of the candidates who's going up, we might actually agree with sometimes, whereas with the other one, we would be completely shut out. And basically what's at stake is that if a Republican takes the governor's seat, it will be absolutely catastrophic for our movement and for the fight to bring people home. Basically, we could be almost totally assured that the Republican governor would not sign off on any commutations that the Board of Pardons might recommend. All that hard work to get the Board of Pardons to recommend more cases would just hit a dead end when it comes to the governor's seat. We could almost be totally assured that that Republican governor would not sign geriatric parole legislation if the legislature put it before him. And given yesterday, the news about the kind of pending Supreme Court decision, we could be guaranteed that a Republican governor would try to fast track efforts to create mandatory minimum legislation to send people to prison who have abortions, or at least try to criminalize the people who help them and funnel more people into the state prison system. So I think that, that is some of the framing that I would kind of, give to y'all about what we're up against. Now, on the other hand, we have Josh Shapiro. As many people will know, our movements really came up against Josh a few years ago. He wasn't voting the way that he needed to vote at the Board of Pardons, particularly on lifers commutations. And we rallied in front of his offices in Philly and Pittsburgh and went all out to hold him accountable. And the good news on that front is that we actually did move him. He went from the worst vote at the board in 2018 and 2019 to the second best vote at the board, with only John Fetterman voting yes more times on lifers going up from 2020 up until now. Sometimes we don't always agree with people, but the question is, can we move them? And I think this really is the case right now with our movements and Attorney General Josh Shapiro on the questions of second chances at the board. We may not always agree with him, but we've seen him get better, and we know he's someone that we can push on the issues that matter to us most. And sometimes we might get a hearing, and sometimes we might get a response from him on that. Also, I think it's important to highlight some other issues. We've seen him voice support for upholding Governor Wolf's death penalty moratorium. I think, as a lot of y'all know, Right now, the death penalty is still on the books in PA. The only thing that stops death sentences from being carried out is that every time one goes up, the governor uses his power to temporarily suspend sentences. It's called the power of reprieve, to temporarily suspend the death sentence from being carried out. And that's why no one gets executed in PA. I think, we know that Josh Shapiro supports the death penalty moratorium. And I think we could be assured that a Republican governor would start that machinery churning again, and it very well might result in people being killed by the state. The other thing that we know that he supports, he's on the record, is ending life without parole for people with felony murder convictions. We know that he supports some type of geriatric parole. And we know that he would support, that he would, veto mandatory minimums that would go before him, and also veto legislation that would criminalize the right to choose an abortion. And I think we can expect that his campaign will release a criminal justice platform sometime this spring, and I would bet that we're going to see some good commitments in that platform. So for us, the question is, really simple. It's a defensive race, and we need to make sure that the Republican is defeated so the Board of Pardons stays open and the possibility of second chances aren't shut down for 4 years or longer. Now, on the question of lieutenant governor, for us, that's also a pretty simple question. Austin Davis, who is running with Josh Shapiro, is the presumptive nominee. And not only that, but he's also explicitly voiced support for second chances. And he has publicly voiced support for Free the Ballot's efforts to win second chances. As many of you know, the lieutenant governor chairs the Board of Pardons in Pennsylvania. He has said to people in our movement that he wants to continue Fetterman's legacy at the board, and that he wants it to be a place for second chances. And he made those commitments kind of recently. So, for us, that was good news, because he was saying he wanted to support second chances for people who've turned around their lives. Supporting him in the primary and also making sure he defeats this Republican in the fall is crucial. We just saw the majority of lifers seeking commutation receive it at the April board meeting. We want to keep that door cracked open and figure out how to open it even wider so more people can come home. And, while I'm stressing these races as defensive races, and these are candidates that are not 100% movement candidates, they're not 100% aligned with us, I can't stress enough how important these elections are. We have to enthusiastically move out to defeat the Republicans in November. If we lose those races, we will, be, pretty shut out in the wilderness for years. We'll be raising our voices. Of course, our movement won't go anywhere. We'll raise our voices. We'll fight against the power if the Republicans win. But some people that we could bring home, if we had a more favorable opponent, those people will remain in prison, and we just can't let that happen. So I'm just going to close with saying, please, we need to do everything we can to make sure we win the governor's race, the lieutenant governor's race this fall, and support Austin Davis in the primary this spring. And let's move out and make sure that the Republicans don't shut the door on us, and more importantly, don't shut the door on people in prison who we care about and who are trying to come home. And with that, I am going to kick it to my comrade Salim to talk about what's up in Pittsburgh and some of the moves that Straight Ahead is making.
Thanks, Wispy. Just very quickly for Pittsburgh, Summer Lee has been someone that has been a consistent fixture and advocate for not just our movement, but for the movement of working class people across Pennsylvania, Black and brown communities across Pennsylvania. So I cannot speak enough about how loud we endorse and support Summer Lee in her race to become the first Black woman in the United States Congress from Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a tough area for people of color, and Summer has been a consistent fighter. And I'm going to emphasize this again, not just for Black and brown people. Summer has been there for all working class people who know what it's like to struggle day in and day out in America, whether it's having a loved one incarcerated, whether it's struggling with big pharma and health insurance companies. She is pro-union. She has been at the forefront of progressive causes. She's someone that is not just a personal friend, but it's a comrade. She's someone that's accessible, someone that is out there in the streets every day. So we wholeheartedly support, endorse Summer Lee. Sarah Inamorado is another one out there who's been doing a lot of great work that has our support as well. So I just really wanted to highlight them two. There's several others out there that we have not directly endorsed either now or in the past. We would urge folks in Pittsburgh to make an informed decision, to question them on decarceration, to question them on union rights, to question them on how well they're not just going to protect your rights and our rights, but also advance them. So that's just a brief update in Pittsburgh. A recap though for Pittsburgh, we did successfully elect a slate of 8 judges out there, something that we definitely, as a movement, we often overlook the elections for judges and DAs. And our position is that we are not ceding any area where power is being contested. Those days are over. Many of us are here because we elected Larry Krasner as district attorney in Philadelphia. There are hundreds of people freed as a result of that election, people who were serving long prison sentences, right? People who earned their second chance. Krasner didn't just open the floodgates for us. That's another false narrative being put out there, but also something that is very important that Amnistad Movement Project Power highlighted earlier. And this speaks also to our role in Pittsburgh. The first thing Larry Krasner did when he was elected was he withdrew from the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association. The Philadelphia office accounted for 60% of their budget, right? And he took them out of that. And the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association is the lobby for mass incarceration in this state. That is all they do, is lobby for more prison sentences, more prisons for our people. And he took the Philadelphia office out of that. He weakened it, and that is something that we need to look to duplicate in other states. And when we elect judges, we do that for the same reasons. We want judges that come in from a harm reduction standpoint. So in Allegheny County, the slate of 8 that we ran, 5 of them won. And those are 5 judges that are approaching criminal justice from a harm reduction standpoint and do not believe that mandatory minimums are the way that we are going to make our community safer. So I just wanted to give that update about Pittsburgh and some of our past work, but also some of the candidates that we're presently supporting.
Thank you, Salim. Everybody, I know that we're a bit over time, but really quick before we end this meeting, I would like to thank everyone for being here. But I also want to highlight a few things that are coming up in the near future for people to get involved in. So the first one is that we are having a 2-set political education series on foundations of mass incarceration. So the first one is going to be next week on the 12th, and that's going to be on our work and this movement in PA. And the second one is going to be on the 17th, and that's going to be on the larger mass incarceration movement. This is, 2 shorter 1-hour workshops that has been pulled from some of the workshops we have done at Straight Ahead. So some of you might have been to the mass incarceration workshops. We attended the PIC one, the abolition one. So for those of you who attended those, it's going to be repeat information, but everyone is welcome to come, and we encourage everyone to come as well. So Zelba is dropping the links in the chat for that. The second thing that we want to bring attention to is the Cabby rally that is happening on the 25th. We want to see everybody there. This is in Harrisburg. This is on May 25th on the Capitol steps from 1 to 3. We want as many people there as possible so we can march the Capitol and show them that we have power in numbers. We are coordinating currently buses and rides. If people need them, please fill out the form. If you need any support in that way, but we want to see you there. We want to see you in Harrisburg. And then the third thing I want to call attention to is that we're going to have a summer gathering in June. I believe the date for that is June 25th. And the location still to be determined, but we do have a registration form so that we can give people updates. That's going to be in person in Philadelphia. But we encourage people who are nearby to come by and have some fun and, you know, meet people in this movement. We're going to have, you know, food and activities and, you know, I'm sure a very interesting discussion and actions as well. So please join us and please sign up. Zelba, if you can drop the Get Involved form. We've been dropping links throughout this whole presentation. So every single link that we dropped is going to be on this form that Zelba is going to drop in the chat shortly. So you can just click on that form and all of the links will be on that form for people that are interested in signing up for our different activities that are happening in the next couple of months. But that concludes our program, and I'll pass it to Salim to give us some closing words.
Thanks, Roxanne. Just very quickly, because I really appreciate everybody for staying on tonight. It's a beautiful day, and I hope everyone can get outside, enjoy some of this weather. We appreciate each and every one of you that is on this call, not just being on this call, but your contribution to this movement. And we say that sincerely because you are our mothers, you are our brothers, you are our uncles, you are our cousins, nieces, and nephews. When I look into the screen, and I know many of my other comrades do it, we see you as we would have seen our family when we were incarcerated out here fighting for us. But more importantly, we are now at a moment in our history in Pennsylvania that this decarceration and abolitionist movement that we are building up, our goal is to have this movement looked upon and respected the same way union power is respected, right? And that's what we want to do with families of the incarcerated and communities that are over-policed and over-incarcerated. And we can't do that alone. This definitely has to be a multi-racial alliance fighting big power, because that's what we are fighting, whether it is fighting the lobby of mass incarceration, whether it's fighting the lobby of big pharma, whether it's fighting billionaires, whether it's fighting developers. We have to do this together as a movement. And we are proud that as a movement, we are here today on par and working with other movements, seeking to create a better and more prosperous Pennsylvania, not just for us, but also for our loved ones who are inside the prisons, for communities that are harmed by violence. We want to fix and resolve that, and also for many of our children and the future. So thank you for joining us tonight. I'm not really good at the closing out speeches. I choose to lead through my work and my example, just like I know many of the folks on this call do. And so I appreciate you for coming out tonight. And let's win May 17th. Please vote for our candidates. Those who support mass incarceration, mandatory minimums, let's get them out of power. We need to put new blood. And also, I'm going to close with this. Y'all notice this. We're not into identity politics. That shit don't play out no more with us. We know that all skin folk ain't kinfolk. And just because you from the hood or from our neighborhoods, that era is done. We're not falling for that no more. We're not being bamboozled anymore. So, you know, we're serious about building this power. We appreciate all you for coming and fighting with us. So have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thank y'all.